It's a moment for all of us here in the UAE or in the Arab region to celebrate with the word hope. We call it Al-Aml in Arabic, which is not just a figure of speech in the UAE. It's embedded in our DNA throughout our values and heritage, history, and civilization. The UAE was just 5 years old, but Sheikh Zayed was already looking. There's an image of Sheikh Zayed when the UAE was just 5 years old. He was already looking at the stars through this picture of him and the crew of Apollo 17 in Abu Dhabi in 1976. His hopes and dreams are now being realized by the young generation by making the impossible possible. And the UAE becomes proudly the first Arab nation that sends a mission, a probe to Mars. This dream is realized through the hard work and determination of the UAE citizens and residents working on a mission in the Arab world. When American astronaut Neil Armstrong put his foot on the lunar surface and said, "That's one small step of a man, one giant leap of mankind," people were immediately filled with feelings of hope for a future that was better than the present, and a present that promised significant development in science and technology. With the UAE making this giant leap in scientific discovery on behalf of the Arab world, it is important to understand how this can benefit art, culture, knowledge, sharing and education in the region and beyond. The image of Sheikh Zayed with the crew of Apollo 17 is a testament of the fact that the UAE space program did not just happen out of the blue. There have been preparations for it through the forward-thinking vision of our founding father. Especially with the global health events, there is isolation and fear. But isolation does not mean we are lonely, like fear doesn't mean that there is no hope. How can we use this time and the choices we make today to lead our lives in the future? How can we use the resources available to us on Earth to improve the quality of life and make new discoveries? How can we contribute to science and knowledge-based economy that will arm us to be self-sufficient? How can we encourage the next generation to lead in footsteps of our dynamic leadership and develop their skills for a successful future? How can we use our position to inspire the next generation of individuals and establish the UAE's position as a beacon of progress in the region? It is important to analyze the pandemic both ways: the impact creative industries will have on a post-COVID-19 society, but also the impact of COVID-19 on the creative industries. To combat the latter, the Ministry of Culture and Youth launched a stimulus package in May 2020 to help creative individuals and SMEs financially impacted by the global health pandemic to sustain their businesses. This is an ongoing support through several phases of offering financial grants. We just concluded round 2 of such grants. We're now working to develop indicators of the cultural sector that will allow us to collect data and prepare for the future based on an accurate information that supports our efforts in the field. Our role is to identify and explore how we make the future more culturally sustainable and allow people to choose an unconventional career path. The creative sector has become an active contributor to our economy and allows us to explore new ways and methods to enhance the contribution of culture towards the local. These initiatives cement the UAE's position as an incubator for knowledge, culture, and creativity, but also helps us understand the impact it has on the development of the society, since many people took comfort, music, film, arts, and maybe baking to divert their minds from this pandemic. In the future, it is likely that the government will have to explore new financing solutions to support and nurture the creative sector. In this part of the world, the concept of crowdfunding is a relatively new idea, which has contributed to the growth of other economic sectors. For the cultural sector to thrive, it needs diverse funding sources and mechanisms. We invite everyone to start exploring different forms of funding to support and nurture the cultural sector. Knowledge and cultural policy analysis have shown that in the future, the gig economy will grow after COVID-19, and regulations to support workers in this area is required. Freelancers and independent workers will need an ecosystem that protects them and empowers them. Opening line of communications between policy makers and workers in the cultural sector is important. This helps policymakers understand that the workers are going through and makes us better able to respond when what the ecosystem needs to grow. Personally, I am very much interested to see what kind of art and creative content that will come out of this pandemic, which saw periods of isolations and closing down of public spaces. Some very prominent works were created during pandemics of the past. For instance, Night Visitor by the ode by Iraqi Syrian poet Al-Mutanabbi, 1915-1965, to Fever is widely considered one of the masterpieces of classical Arabic poetry. Taha Hussein, autobiographical narrative set in Egypt, 1889-1902, and published as Al-Ayyam in an Arabic charts, the story of an author's brother who dies in cholera epidemic. Najib's Mahfoud novel, The Harafish, 1977, is also around a plague-infested city. These examples not only communicate significant period in history, but also continues to inform much of these creatives' practice after the pandemic and garnered them to recognition they have today. Art and culture have always had the flexibility to change with time and reflect the society in its most raw and true form. On one hand, we're more connected than ever to our identity, the world around us, and current affairs throughout the world. What is important is to keep an open mind and an approach in the future with a changed behavior for our benefit and the benefit of the society. To conclude, James Treadwell, the first British ambassador to the UAE, questioned where the UAE was headed and if it will be able to sustain itself in the future. From a desert land in 1971 to reaching out of space in just 50 years since the inception of the country does not only answer James' questions, but also demonstrates the country's achievement over the past decades. The country has allowed itself to move to the future because of a visionary founding father, Sheikh Zayed. He established the country with the help of 40 graduates. When everyone thought they couldn't help establish a country, they made the impossible possible. The UAE is based on their willingness to achieve their goal and not the resources that were available at the time. Sheikh Zayed was visionary, man who did not wait for opportunities to come to him, but reach out to them. We can lead from such examples, from the history of the UAE, and hope to create a positive future that can sustain itself for the future generations. Thank you, Badr.